I've got two beautiful cabochons from Charmers Gems. So I thought I'd show you how I could wire wrap them in two different ways. So here are the sodalite and the mahogany obsidian. So this is one I made earlier. You can see it's labradorite and it's got a gorgeous sheen, hasn't it? So this is one type of wire wrapping. It's my favorite actually. It's the one I do most. It's very simple and it doesn't hide any of the stone. And this is another type which I'm not very good at. It's a netting. It's a sort of basket netting, but it does hold it in place. And they're both completely different. So I thought one might suit one of you and the other the other. So give them a go. So I've got my usual tools. I've got some masking tape. I've got some 0.4 wire and some 0.8. And I think I'll start off with the oval mahogany obsidian a cabochon first. So the way I do this is the simple wire wrapping. I just get a piece of string, but it could be a piece of paper, anything, just to measure around the circumference of the stone. And I add extra for the bail, so about 4 inches extra for the bail. And that gives me my measured length that I need to cut. So this is 0.8 20 gauge. And I want to have 3 pieces of this measurement. So my first one is my measured piece, and then I just use that to measure the next 2. So 0.8 soft, this is silver plated copper wire that I'm using. Now I just want to straighten those lengths out a bit, so I just run them through my hands, but you know, you can put them in a vise and pull and twist, whichever way you want to do it. Just straighten them out. Don't have to be perfectly straight, but just as long as you can sort of get them, because they're all going to sit together in a minute. So 3 straight lengths. Then I'm going to use 0.4 mil, my binding wire, and I'm going to cut 3 short lengths. So they're only about 2.5 inches, maximum 3. Just short little lengths, but I just want 3 of them again. And then I'm going to pick all my 3 thicker wires up, hold them together right at the center so that they all sit one on top of the other, and then use one of my binding wires, take it from the center, and then wire wrap tightly around the center of the 3 strands. And just sort of like push that down with my flat nose pliers so that none of those wires bundles up together and goes on top of the other. So they should sit one on top in a row. And now I make sure that my 2 ends of my binding wire finish on the same side, and they're all nicely scooched up together so they're sitting nice and neat, and they end up on the same side, and then I just lift and cut. So I don't want those little binding ends to sit outside of the wire wrapping. So that's my first binding right at the center. And now I take another one of my binding wires, and I want to sort of measure from, I'm going to bind, that's the centerpiece, I want a binding on each side. So it's roughly, you know, about just under 1 inch along from that center. Do the same thing again. So I'm holding it, keeping those wires nice and flat and wrapping it tightly, but making sure they don't bunch up. And you don't have to bind too much. It's literally like, you know, I don't know, 6 or 7 wraps, 5 or 6, 7 wraps. And again, make sure that the cut ends are on the same side as the first center binding. So all your cut ends should be on the same side because they're going to go inside the stone. They'll never be on the outside. So there's your second binding. And we've only got to do that once more for the opposite side. So go again, other side of the center binding, and again make sure that those wires are aligned, one on top of the other. That's the hardest thing really, is just to make sure they don't bunch and sort of like cross over each other. So just spend a bit of time doing this, make it nice and neat, scooch those wires up, because you will see these on the outside of the stone. And again, make sure that your cut ends are on the same side. So just bring them around, flatten them, and then make sure that cut end is not poking out on the side of the thicker wires. So that gives you your binding ready to start putting around the stone. Now I'm going to get some masking tape to help me connect it to the stone so that I can begin molding the shape. But before I get the masking tape on, I'm just going to start shaping it a little bit. I'm using, as you can see, my whammer hammer just to get the start of the curve of the stone. It really depends on the shape of your stone. So that gives me a starting point, and you can see that's going to sort of sit there with the bindings on each side. So I've got very thick masking tape, so I'm going to cut this into 3 strands. So these are going to cover my bindings. So that's 1. Oh dear, it's got stuck. It's still usable. Just keep them aside. You can sort of put them on the side of your table like this. 3 strands of masking tape. It's everything in threes, isn't it? And take your masking tape and put it on the outside of your center binding. Now place the base of your stone, so decide which is, the base, and push the tape over the binding and onto the stone. So that holds that, otherwise you wouldn't be able to hold this, it would slide around. So that just gives a bit of security. And then you're going to do the same to each of the side bindings. Just cover them up with thin tape. So now you've got to bring the ends around to the top of the stone, so the ends of the wire. So what I tend to do, so it doesn't bunch up, and really this is, there are no rules. You're watching me make this, and it doesn't mean it's the right way, it's just a way. Sorry, I'm out of shot. I'll have to bring my... So I've put one wire from one side between the other wire from the other side, just to sort of bring them together so that they're not all bunched up. That just helps me work with them. And what I want to do is find one of the middle wires and go to the top center point of my stone and bend that up to a right angle, so that that's going to be my bail. So I want to make sure that sits proud at the top of the stone where I want to suspend the stone. And then all the other wires can be wrapped around that one. So obviously some will go around in one direction because they come from one direction, and the others will go around that top wire in another direction. But just keep wrapping one by one, just once around that top projecting wire, and bring them all to the front of the stone. The thing is to do them one by one, and that way it doesn't get too bulky. You can control it a little bit easier that way. You see, they're all now at the front with the bail wire projecting up from the top of the stone. Now just check you haven't pulled the wires too much, because you want the one wire to sit around the stone, and then the other two wires, the wire in the front and the wire at the back, to be pulled to the back and the front to hold the stone in place. So with my fingers, I'm just going to gently ease the front wires out. Then I'm going to go to the back and gently ease the back wires out. And this just gives me a little bit of security, because otherwise the stone is just going to pop out. Because in a minute I'm going to take that masking tape away. And so now it's being held in place by the front and back wires, with the center wire going around the perimeter. So you just do this slowly with your fingers, because you don't want to scratch the stone. And when you feel that, I'm just putting one wire at the back, actually I've decided, because I've got so many wires here, I'm going to make spirals out of these, decorative spirals, but I'll have one at the back and the others in the front. And some of them are a bit long, so I'm just going to cut one or two down maybe, so that the stone isn't over decorated at the top, because I don't want to take away from a beautiful stone. I want to enhance it, but and also it's a way of covering your wire wrapping at the top. Any messy bits get covered up. So it's quite a useful technique, because it looks decorative, but it's not just decorative, it's also there to hide a multitude of messiness underneath. So just take each of the extended wires and create little spirals. You can also add a bead before you spiral. You could add a little semi-precious chip to the top, add a bit more colour. I tend to make these quite plain, because I like just to show off the gemstone. And you can turn the spirals one way or the other way, that's completely up to you. You can make them tight spirals, open spirals, you can make them different shapes. It's just a decorative process, whatever comes to your mind at the time while you're creating it. So I'm nearly there with using up all the excess wire at the top of the stone. I'll just go to this one at the back and finish off with one more spiral that will sit at the back of the stone, and that will also hide the wire wrapping at the top, and just sort of give it another bit of added decoration. So I don't spend too long getting those perfect, because I'll come back to them right at the end. That's when I can sort of jig it around and make sure everything is exactly as I want it to be. So now I'm going to remove the masking tape, because I know that it's not going to fall out. The stone is not going to fall out. It's in that frame. So remove your masking tape and any residue that's on the stone. If you've got glue residue, you can always use a bit of white spirit to get it off. And then you spend a bit of time getting those done. I'm going to put the masking tape over my flat nose pliers, so that I don't use the steel directly on the stone, and this will avoid scratching the stone. But if you have nylon pliers, these are very useful at this point, but otherwise just a bit of masking tape over the steel will mean you won't scratch the surface. So I'm just tightening the wires now. It tightens them around the stone so it holds it better. And I can even use my nylon tip of my hammer to make curves. You see, I'm just pushing it to curve the wire over the stone, and that won't leave any marks on the gemstone either. So spend a bit of time sort of manipulating everything and getting it just as you want it, moving the spirals around, getting the bail to sit centrally. And when you're happy with the overall arrangement, then all you need to do is select a bead for the top and create your suspension link. So here's a bead I found. I'm just going to pop that at the top, and then you don't have to do this, but I like to hammer a little area just above the bead. So obviously if you've got a glass bead or a gemstone, be very careful not to hammer that and break it. But I'm just flattening and spreading the wire just above that bead. And what that does is just spreads it and work hardens it, so that when I make my bail, I can use my bail makers and it just gives a little bit more of a solid feel to the top wire rather than just a round wire. So I'm making the circular link, and it's a wrap link at this point, and then I'm using the excess to wrap just under to secure and close the link, then cut it off. There's so many ways of doing bails. I could have left 2 of the wires projecting and done a woven bail, but I wanted to do something really simple just to show you that it doesn't have to take forever to make these framed cabochon pendants. So I hope you liked that particular one. That's my favourite to make. And you can see it looks lovely on a chain or a cord or a ribbon. So for the next one with a sodalite, I thought I'll give you a netted basket. So again, I'm measuring around and I'm leaving sort of a good 2 to 3, 4 inches, you know, be generous. And that is my measured piece from my 0.8mm, that's 20 gauge. So, and I'm only needing one wire, one big wire for this. Now I'm using that and shaping it around the contour of the stone. So depending on the shape of your stone, you will take the wire and cross it over at the top. You might want to suspend it the other way around, which is fine, and then you just do it the other way around. And once you've done that, then you want to make it a bit smaller. So you can see I've made it, and now I'm pushing it and making the shape smaller, because this shape that mimics the stone has got to be smaller than the stone and sit at the back. It mustn't be seen from the front. So I just spend a bit of time mimicking the shape but making a smaller version of it in wire. So once I've got that shape, I'm going to bend the projecting wires that I'm not using, those are going to be my bail, out on each side. I don't want to cross them over, and then I'm just going to hammer that framework. And the only reason I hammer it is because I want to work hard on it. I want to make sure that it's not going to misshape, it's going to stay. And now I'm going to use 0.4. So you want to cut a nice long arm's length because you're going to be doing a little bit of wire weaving. So I'm connecting that on one of the wires at the top. I've left a little bit of surplus excess, and then coming over to secure it again around on the opposite side. And I'm going to wire weave a loop around the outside. So once you've got it fixed and connected, you want to make a little loop, bring the wire within the frame and around again so that it's connected to the outer frame. And then another little loop, and you hold that with your fingers, and then around the frame and back to the other side. And if you find it hard to do it by hand, you can put your pliers in place to make those loops more even. So if you feel just doing it by eye like I'm doing is a bit of a problem, just place something round mandrel or your pliers and you'll get a more even shaped loop. I'm afraid I'm always a bit rushed with these things. I just want to get them done. and I tend to eyeball everything. That's probably why I'm so bad at wire weaving, because I'm not very good at this particular netting technique, but I wanted to show you the principle so that if you like the idea better than the first option, and you want to give it a go, then, you know, by all means, you'll probably be better at it than me, because it's not something I usually do. Some people are brilliant at weaving and they just love the repetitive feel of it, and others find it a bit monotonous. So it's just a personal preference. So you can see you go all the way around making these little loops, almost like little petal shapes, and don't make them too big. Really, that's one of the things, because your stone is not huge, so you don't want to just make them, you know, a little sort of loop size, like your round nose plies size, and come all the way around the framework and finish off with one last petal at the top that you can just fit into that top. So that's your first row, and you're really going to build about 3 more rows on top of these. So once you've got that, you carry on by taking the very, very end of your wire, going through from the front to the back of the loop, and then bringing the end back to the front, creating another loop. So from the front of the loop to the back, and then bringing it round and pulling it. And you must keep your wire. This is the hardest thing about doing this type of weaving. It's exactly like doing dream catchers, really, but it's keeping the wire without any kinks in it. So you really have to keep smoothing it out and keeping it round. And because once you've got a kink in it and you've pulled it and you've kinked it, it's very hard to get out. And that's, I think, why I struggle with it, because I tend to rush it. And you can see it's looped into the loops, and then it creates another loop. So you go all the way around. I've done 2. You can see I've moved forward very quickly, and then you want to see if it fits your stone. So this should now come just over, and that's where I can put the stone inside my little woven netted basket. Because the wire is so soft and thin, it just hugs it so easily. There you can see the back. The back must sit central, and you just push these pieces of netted wire around it to hold it in place. And we're going to do one last weave. So I've finished off my wire. I'm going to have to cut another one, and then you want to connect it. In fact, sometimes I connect it to the netting, but I think because I finished up at the top, I'm going to connect it to one of those top projecting wires. It'll give me more stability and security if I just wrap it around one of them, and then I've got it nice and solid. And so now I'm just going to continue my last, this is the last row of weaving these netted things. And you could, this time, you could go through the little loops at the, instead of going through the big loopy loop bits, go through the crossed over loops. You can see I'm going into those bits now, just to finish off. It'll give you a bit more security. And you just keep going all the way around. And what that does is it sort of tightens the rest of the weave around the stone and really hugs it. So you just keep going around, and you will find, because sometimes, you know, as you're using a long piece like this, you just got to keep it nice, the wire nice and rounded, the wire nice and straight. You just run it through your fingers every time. If, oh gosh, you see, like me, you can't get it in because you've tuned up the end. It looks like a dog has got to the end of the wire. Just cut off that tune off bit and find a way of getting it back through the gap. You can always lift it up a little bit, and you might need the ends of your chain nose pliers just to help you bring it through. Just gently bring it round. I suppose this is very much like sewing. Right, I've gone all the way around the stone. It's hugging it now. It's not going to fall out. It's not beautiful, but now I'm ready to do the bail. So for the bail, I've let it stay narrow from where it comes out of the stone, and then I'm going to let it go wider. It just gives a nice shape, and then bring it back in. So I'm just bending that shape, and that's my sort of shape that I want for the bail. So again, you can decide, you can have it just straight, or you can shape it like I am doing, which is, I think I've got my bend in the wrong place. Sometimes you've got to use, maybe, don't go and eyeball it like me, use a ruler maybe. I'm hammering just the beginning of those wires, because again, the wires are very flexible and they can move. So by hammering them, I just give them a bit of stability and work hardening. So that long wire, if you've run out of wire at this stage, you can always cut a length at this point and then, start again. So I'm bending the very, very ends of those projecting wires out so I can get through that gap to weave. So for this weave, it's a ladder weave. I'm just going 3 times around one side, bringing it across to the other wire, 3 times around that side, and all the time I'm making sure I'm scooching those wires close together so that they're as neat as possible. So 1, 2, 3, and across. 1, 2, 3, and across. So you can do it every 2. You can do. I mean, this is, if you like weaving, you probably have your own. There are many different types of weaves. So there's no right or wrong. It's just a way of filling up that gap. And again, the hardest thing with this is those wires want to move. They want to misshape. So you've really got to keep your fingers on top of the weave that you have just completed and go all the way up to the top. So there, I've done my ladder weave all the way up, and now we're going to make the actual bail. So I bend it forward towards the front of the stone. You can put a pencil or a pen, but I've got some bail makers here, and make that shape, that rounded shape for my bail. So there's the shape. And now I'm going to cut the excess wire off. I only need a little bit left remaining. And with those ends, I'm just going to make 2 tiny little circles so that the wire can't fall off. So little loops, tiny circular loops, right at the end. And just turn those flat around so that they'll sit better at the back. And now we want to bring that really close up to the top of the stone, to pinch it really together. The way to do that is to bend those 2 little links you just made outwards, and then you can pinch the whole thing together. So I'm left with 2 0.4 wires. One of them was my binding wire and the other one was one of the weaving wires. And so I never cut anything off until the end, because I just want to make sure I've got enough and also not waste it. So I'm just wrapping that around and around the very, very top to grip the base of the bail together. So there's no special technique to this. It's just, and if you've got any left over like me, you can always make a little spiral out of the 0.4 remaining, or if you don't have any, you can always add another piece of wire. It could even be some of the 0.8 connected on at this point, and then you create a spiral at the top. But because I've got this left over, I'm using this, spiraling it up to the front, and just that will flatten right at the center top of my piece, just to add a bit of decoration and hide any unsightly bits that might be there. And really that is pretty much it, except I've made that not that well, but I'm going to push in even, I think, that top bit, because it's so wide. I've made such a wide bail that just by making a little dent in the center, what that does is tightens those wires and just creates another little feature, really. So now I'm just ready for my cord, or if you want to put it on a ribbon, anything you want to hang it from. So I hope you've enjoyed both versions and that you'll give them a go. Many thanks.